March 29, 1987. The Pontiac Silverdome in Michigan. Over 90,000 fans packed a building so loud you could feel it in your chest. Hulk Hogan stood across from André the Giant. The irresistible force versus the immovable object. When Hogan got underneath André, lifted all 520 pounds of him off the mat, and slammed him to the canvas, something happened that went way beyond professional wrestling. That moment became one of the most iconic images of the entire 1980s. It was replayed on news broadcasts. It was talked about in schools. It was the kind of moment that even people who had never watched a single second of wrestling knew about. And it was just one night in a year that might be the single greatest 12 months in the history of WWE. 1987 is the year the World Wrestling Federation stopped being a wrestling company and became a permanent fixture of American culture. The year Vince McMahon filled the biggest building he could find, launched a pay-per-view franchise that still runs today, formed the most popular tag team alliance of the Golden Era, and effectively ended the Territorial War that had defined professional wrestling for decades. From Wrestlemania 3 to the first ever Survivor Series, from the Mega Powers handshake to the $1 Million Man's debut, from the greatest in-ring performance the World Wrestling Federation had ever seen to the most ruthless business move in wrestling history. This is the year where everything came together at once. So today, we are breaking down exactly why 1987 stands as one of the greatest years in World Wrestling Federation history. 8 reasons, all of them undeniable. Number 1. WrestleMania 3 changed what a wrestling event could be. We have to start here because there is no way to talk about 1987 without starting at the Pontiac Silverdome. WrestleMania 3 was not just a pay-per-view. It was not just the biggest wrestling show ever produced. It was the moment professional wrestling proved it could compete with any form of live entertainment on the planet. Let us talk numbers first because they are staggering. The announced attendance was 93,173, and while that number has been debated for nearly 4 decades, the best available evidence places the figure at about 88,000, with roughly 85,000 paid. The controversy stems from local promoter Zane Bresloff's paperwork, which listed about 78,500, but more recent investigations found that figure likely excluded suite and club-level ticket holders. A World Wrestling Federation press release from the week before listed ticket sales at more than 88,000, and Silverdome director Mike Abington told Amusement Business that tickets sold totaled 88,100. Add the roughly 3,000 workers who were in the building without tickets, and you are looking at close to 91,000 people in one building for a wrestling show. Either way, it shattered every indoor attendance record for a sporting or entertainment event. Super Bowl XVI had drawn 81,000 at the same venue in 1982. WrestleMania 3 topped that. Aretha Franklin opened the show singing America the Beautiful from a baby grand piano. Bob Uecker and Mary Hart were guest commentators. Gorilla Monsoon and Jesse Ventura called the action. This was not a niche product anymore. This was mainstream American entertainment at its absolute peak. The financial numbers were just as absurd. Ticket prices ranged from $9 to $100, generating a $1.6 million gate. Between 400,000 and 520,000 homes bought the pay-per-view. And keep in mind the pay-per-view universe was only about 5 to 6.5 million homes at the time, so that penetration rate was enormous. The show generated over $10 million in pay-per-view revenue alone, a record. Another 450,000 tickets were sold at 160 closed-circuit television locations across North America. Over 1 million people watched WrestleMania 3 live across all platforms. To put that in perspective, WrestleMania 1 had drawn roughly 398,000 closed-circuit viewers, and WrestleMania 2, which was split across 3 venues, did approximately 319,000. WrestleMania 3 blew both of those out of the water. The go-home show on NBC, Saturday night's main event, pulled an 11.6 rating and a 33 share. 1 in 3 American televisions that were turned on that night was tuned to professional wrestling. Now let's talk about the main event. Hulk Hogan versus André the Giant needs no introduction, but the story behind it deserves one. The build-up was a masterclass in slow-burn storytelling, constructed across 4 consecutive Piper's Pit segments on Superstars of Wrestling. First, World Wrestling Federation President Jack Tunney presented Hogan with a trophy celebrating 3 years as champion. Andre congratulated him but said something that stuck. 3 years to be a champion, it is a long time. The next week, Tunney gave Andre a visibly smaller trophy for being undefeated in the World Wrestling Federation for 15 years. Hogan dominated the interview spotlight, and Andre was left standing there looking annoyed while the cameras followed Hogan. It was subtle, and it was brilliant. Then came the moment everything became pivotal. The episode that aired February 7, 1987, had been taped January 26th at the Sundome in Tampa. On Piper's Pit, Andre walked out flanked by Bobby the Brain Heenan, Hogan's longtime nemesis. Heenan announced himself as Andre's new manager. Andre challenged Hogan, then reached out and ripped the shirt and crucifix necklace right off his chest, accidentally scratching Hogan and drawing blood in the process. It was unplanned. The cross scratched his skin. Roddy Piper looked at Hogan and said, "You're bleeding." Hogan, tears in his eyes, screamed, "Yes!" and accepted the challenge. It was the most personal betrayal in World Wrestling Federation history, committed by a man who was supposed to be Hogan's friend. Billed as the irresistible force meets the immovable object, it was Hogan's 3-year title reign against Andre's 15-year undefeated streak. The biggest match that could possibly be made in 1987. What makes the match even more incredible is what Andre was dealing with behind the scenes. His acromegaly, the pituitary condition that gave him his enormous size, had deteriorated his spine and joints to the point where he was in constant, excruciating pain. He wore a back brace under his singlet. The $1 Million Man later noted that Andre hated pills and used alcohol to cope with the pain. Whether his major back surgery came before or after WrestleMania 3 remains disputed among historians, but either way, the fact that he went out there and performed at all was a testament to his love for the business. The match itself was carefully structured to protect Andre. About a minute in, Hogan attempted an early body slam but could not lift Andre, who fell on top for a terrifying near fall. Andre controlled much of the match with wear-down offense. Then Hogan hulked up. He ducked a big boot, hit a clothesline, and then lifted Andre up and body slammed all 520 pounds of him to the canvas. The Silverdome erupted. The leg drop. The 1, 2, 3. It was over. This was the body slam the world remembers. Hogan talked about it years later on the Steve Austin show. Andre had come off huge back surgery and he was in a lot of pain. I said, "Dude, your back is bad. Are we gonna do the slam?" He came towards me and I got underneath him and thank God I got him. I tore my back, I tore my bicep, tore my delt in 3 places, but I turned him over. And then he said something that always gets me. He did that for the wrestling business. Andre knew it was time to pass the torch. Thank God he did. Dave Meltzer gave the match -4 stars. The Wrestling Observer named it Worst Worked Match of the Year for 1987. And absolutely none of that matters. In-ring quality was never the point of Hogan versus Andre. The body slam heard around the world was a cultural event. It was the single defining image of the golden era. When the rematch aired on NBC's The Main Event on February 5, 1988, it drew 33 million viewers, the most watched wrestling match in North American television history, a number that has never been touched since. Number 2. Savage vs. Steamboat redefined in-ring wrestling. If Hogan and Andre gave WrestleMania 3 its spectacle, Randy Macho Man Savage and Ricky the Dragon Steamboat gave it its soul. Their Intercontinental Championship bout is not just one of the best matches of 1987. It is routinely cited as one of the greatest matches in the entire history of professional wrestling. Period. Full stop. The feud started on the November 22, 1986 episode of Superstars when Savage attacked Steamboat at ringside. He dropped him throat first across the steel security guardrail, then climbed to the top rope, grabbed the ring bell, and drove it directly into Steamboat's exposed throat. The storyline was that Steamboat's larynx had been crushed. He was hospitalized. He was off television for months. Vince McMahon screamed on commentary that he couldn't breathe, and he kept shouting, "Look at that, he can't breathe." It was one of the most vicious attacks the World Wrestling Federation had ever aired, and it set the stage for one of the greatest revenge stories in wrestling history. George the Animal Steele, connected through his kayfabe crush on Miss Elizabeth, would be in Steamboat's corner for the Wrestlemania match. What separated this match from everything else on the card, and really everything else in the entire era, was how it was constructed. Randy Savage was obsessive about preparation, in a way that nobody in the World Wrestling Federation was at the time. Unlike most wrestlers of the 1980s who called their matches on the fly in the ring, Savage scripted every single move on yellow legal pads, every reversal, every near fall, every transition. Steamboat later recalled that he was using one of those legal pads and he got to about the 5th page. He was at step 250 and he had never had a match that was laid out from A to Z. They spent approximately 5 months crafting the match, running through the sequences at house shows across the country, drilling it until every beat was second nature. Savage's brother Lanny Poffo put it beautifully. Randy was absolutely in love with Steamboat as far as a performer. When you finally get a good dance partner, it's like Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. The result was 14 minutes and 35 seconds of rapid-fire reversals, arm drags, high-flying offense, and an astonishing 22 near falls that had the Silverdome crowd in a frenzy. The finish was a perfect callback to the original attack. The referee Dave Hebner took a bump. Savage reached for the ring bell, the same weapon that started everything. George Steele interfered, knocking Savage off the top rope. Savage tried a scoop slam, and Steamboat reversed it into a small package for the 1, 2, 3. The first Intercontinental Championship change in WrestleMania history. Meltzer rated it 4.5 stars, his highest WWE rating of the entire 1980s decade. Pro Wrestling Illustrated and the Wrestling Observer newsletter both named it Match of the Year for 1987. Chris Jericho, Edge, and an entire generation of future wrestlers have cited this specific match as the reason they got into the business. Steamboat later reflected that everywhere he went, that match was always brought up. About Savage, who passed away in 2011, he said he wished Savage was still with us so they could share the accolades he was getting 30 years later. One show, 2 matches that defined an entire era of professional wrestling from completely different angles. That alone would make 1987 legendary. But we are just getting started. Number 3. The storylines were the best in the business. 1987 was not just about big events. The year-round storytelling on weekly television was operating at a level WWE had never reached before. Every week, characters were evolving. Feuds were escalating, and the audience was growing because they had to tune in to see what happened next. Let's start with the Mega Powers, because this was the biggest storyline of the second half of 1987. Randy Savage entered the year as a heel Intercontinental Champion. He lost the title to Ricky Steamboat at WrestleMania 3, and then something interesting started to happen. The Honky Tonk Man won the Intercontinental belt and started calling himself the greatest Intercontinental Champion of all time. Savage took exception to that. He won the King of the Ring tournament on September 4th in Providence, Rhode Island, beating King Kong Bundy in the finals. But the real moment, the moment that changed everything, came on Saturday night's Main Event 12, which aired October 3rd, 1987. After a disqualification loss to the Honky Tonk Man, the Hart Foundation and Honky beat Savage down in a 3-on-1 assault. Then they shoved Miss Elizabeth to the mat. Elizabeth ran backstage and the crowd waited. Then Hulk Hogan's music hit. Hogan charged to the ring and cleaned house. When the dust settled, Savage looked at Hogan, and Hogan looked at Savage. Savage extended his hand. Hogan shook it, and in the backstage interview with Mean Gene Okerlund, Savage coined the name that would define the next year and a half of WWE television. The Mega Powers, the most popular alliance in the golden era of wrestling, was born, and the seeds were planted for one of the greatest eventual betrayals in wrestling history at WrestleMania 5. The Honky Tonk Man's Intercontinental Championship reign deserves its own discussion. He won the title on June 2, 1987 in Buffalo, New York, defeating Ricky Steamboat on Superstars. The backstory is fascinating. Steamboat had asked Vince McMahon for time off because his wife was expecting their first child, and that did not sit well with management. The original plan reportedly called for Butch Reed to win the belt, but Reed no-showed the taping. The Honky Tonk Man got the nod, allegedly at Hulk Hogan's suggestion, and what a decision it turned out to be. Honky's reign lasted 454 days, the longest Intercontinental Championship reign in history, a record that stood for over 35 years until Gunther broke it in 2023. As a cowardly heel champion who won by disqualification, countout, and constant interference from Jimmy Hart, Honky became one of the most hated and most effective heels in the entire company. The $1 Million Man's arrival was another major storyline. He debuted at a house show on May 15th in Houston, initially working as a babyface before turning heel in June. The first $1 Million Man vignettes aired June 27th on Superstars, and they were instant classics. The $1 Million Man going out into the real world and humiliating ordinary people for money. Making kids do push-ups and dribble basketballs before snatching the cash away at the last second. A young Rob Van Dam even appeared in one vignette, kissing the $1 Million Man's feet for $300. The character was despicable, and audiences ate it up. By late 1987, the $1 Million Man announced his plan to buy the World Wrestling Federation Championship directly from Hogan, setting the stage for the iconic twin referees match on the main event in February 1988. And the storylines did not stop there. Jake the Snake. Roberts completed his babyface turn after the Honky Tonk Man attacked him with a guitar on the Snake Pit interview segment, legitimately injuring Roberts' neck. Their feud was personal and compelling. The Hart Foundation won the tag titles from the British Bulldogs through the crooked referee Danny Davis angle, one of the most hated storylines of the year. Strikeforce dethroned them in October. Demolition debuted as a monster heel tag team under Mr. Fuji and immediately started destroying everyone in their path. Brutus Beefcake transformed into the Barber after helping Roddy Piper shave Adrian Adonis bald at WrestleMania 3. Paul Orndorff discovered Bobby Heenan had recruited Rick Rude as his replacement in the Heenan family and fired Heenan, completing his face turn. The Islanders turned heel under Heenan and kidnapped the British Bulldogs mascot Matilda on the December 26th episode of Superstars. Every single week on television, something was happening, and audiences kept coming back for more. Number 4. The deepest roster in wrestling history. Look at this roster. Just look at it, and then tell me any other year in the 1980s that even comes close. At the very top, you had Hulk Hogan holding the WWE Championship through his legendary 1,474-day reign. André the Giant was his primary rival. Randy Savage ascended from the mid-card to co-main event status by the end of the year. Ricky Steamboat was the best pure in-ring worker in the company before his departure. The upper mid-card was absolutely loaded. Jake the Snake. Roberts arrived with Damien. The Honky Tonk Man was Intercontinental Champion with Jimmy Hart. Hacksaw Jim Duggan debuted in January after coming over from Mid-South. The $1 Million Man appeared with Virgil. Bam Bam Bigelow debuted in May with Oliver Humperdinck. Ravishing Rick Rude debuted in July as part of the Heenan family. King Harley Race, King Kong Bundy, Hercules, One Man Gang with Slick, and Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff rounded out the top tier. The mid-card featured Brutus the Barber Beefcake, Coco B. Ware with Frankie the Parrot, Junkyard Dog, Greg the Hammer Valentine, Hillbilly Jim, George the Animal Steel, Kamala, Nikolai Volkov, the Iron Sheik, and part-timer Bruno Sammartino. The tag division was absurdly stacked. The Hart Foundation, Strikeforce with Tito Santana and Rick Martel, the British Bulldogs with Davey Boy Smith and Dynamite Kid, Demolition with Axe and Smash, the Killer Bees, the Can-Am Connection before Tom Zenk's departure over a pay dispute, the fabulous Rougeau brothers, the Young Stallions, the Islanders, the Bolsheviks. The managerial talent was world-class. Bobby Heenan led the Heenan family, which at various points included André, Rude, Race, Hercules, Bundy, and the Islanders. Jimmy Hart managed the Hart Foundation, the Honky Tonk Man, and Adrian Adonis. Slick guided Butch Reed, One Man Gang, and the Bolsheviks. Mr. Fuji managed Demolition. Miss Elizabeth was with Savage. Key 1987. Debuts included Hacksaw Jim Dugan, Demolition, Bam Bam Bigelow, Rick Rude, The $1 Million Man, One Man Gang, Ron Bass, and in late 1987 squash matches a young man who would eventually change the entire business, the Ultimate Warrior. Major departures included Roddy Piper, who retired to go make movies after WrestleMania 3, Adrian Adonis, who was released in May, and Ricky Steamboat, who was depushed after requesting time off. The roster was so deep that losing top-level talent barely made a dent in the product. Number 5. Television made the WWE inescapable. The WWE's television strategy in 1987 was a multi-platform blitz, the likes of which no wrestling company had ever attempted before. 5 Saturday Night's main event episodes aired on NBC during the year, drawing Nielsen ratings between 9.5 and 11.6. These were primetime numbers on a major broadcast network. Saturday Night's main event replaced Saturday Night Live in NBC's schedule, which tells you everything about how valuable wrestling was to that network. The highest-rated installment was the WrestleMania 3 Go Home show on March 14th, featuring a 20-man battle royal with Hogan and André, pulling an enormous 11.6 rating and a 33 share. Each episode served a critical storytelling purpose. The 9th Saturday Night's main event in January featured Hogan versus Orndorff in a steel cage. The 11th Saturday Night's main event in May saw Savage drop the flying elbow on Steamboat after a match. The 12th Saturday Night's main event in October witnessed the birth of the Mega Powers. The 13th Saturday Night's main event in November featured André interfering in Hogan's match against King Kong Bundy, with NFL star Brian Bosworth in the audience. These specials were not throwaway shows. They were appointment television that moved feuds forward and kept audiences hooked between pay-per-view events. Beyond NBC, the WWE's syndication strategy blanketed the country. WWE Superstars of Wrestling was the flagship show, airing on hundreds of local stations nationwide, hosted by Vince McMahon and Jesse Ventura. 3 significant title changes aired on Superstars in 1987. WWE Wrestling Challenge served as the secondary syndicated program with a similar format, hosted by Gorilla Monsoon and Bobby Heenan. On cable, WWE Primetime Wrestling aired weekly on the USA Network, a 2-hour Monday night show hosted by Monsoon and Heenan, arguably the greatest commentary pairing in wrestling history. Primetime compiled the best syndicated matches along with exclusive house show bouts from Madison Square Garden, Boston Garden, the Philadelphia Spectrum, and the Capitol Center. UWE All-American Wrestling provided even more USA Network programming. This saturation strategy meant the WWE was on television multiple times per week in virtually every American market. No matter where you lived, no matter when you turned on the TV, there was a strong chance you were going to see professional wrestling. And every single program served a purpose. Syndicated shows promoted house shows. Saturday Night's main event built toward pay-per-view events. Primetime wrestling kept the cable audience engaged. It was a machine, and in 1987, that machine was running at full speed. Number 6. Survivor Series was a weapon disguised as a wrestling show. The first ever Survivor Series, on November 26, 1987, Thanksgiving night, at the Richfield Coliseum in Ohio, was both a creative triumph and one of the most ruthless business moves in the history of professional wrestling. On the surface, it was a fantastic event. The entire card consisted of elimination tag team matches, a brand new concept that felt fresh and exciting. The main event saw Team André, which included André, One Man Gang, King Kong Bundy, Rick Rude, and Butch Reed, defeat Team Hogan, which featured Hogan, Orndorff, Bam Bam Bigelow, Don Morocco, and Ken Patera. André emerged as the sole survivor after Hogan was counted out. That was a huge deal. It re-established André as a completely credible title threat heading into 1988, and it gave the Hogan and André feud new legs. In the undercard, Team Savage survived against Team Honky Tonk Man, with Savage, Jake Roberts, and Hacksaw Jim Duggan as the three remaining survivors. The Jumping Bomb Angels delivered a breakout performance in the women's elimination match, which the Wrestling Observer rated 4 stars. Every single champion was eliminated in their respective match. That strategically set up new challengers across the board heading into WrestleMania 4. But the real story, the story that permanently altered the wrestling business, was what happened behind the scenes. Jim Crockett Promotions, the largest NWA affiliate and WWE's only real competitor, had scheduled Starrcade 1987, the NWA's flagship event, on pay-per-view for the first time ever. They scheduled it on the same night, Thanksgiving. Vince McMahon's response was absolutely nuclear. He went to cable operators and told them, in no uncertain terms, that if they carried Starrcade, they would be barred from carrying WrestleMania 4 the following March. In 1987, every cable operator had to be negotiated with individually. No company was going to sacrifice WrestleMania's proven goldmine, a show that had just generated over $10 million in pay-per-view revenue, for a single NWA event. The result was devastating. Only 4 cable companies carried Starrcade. 3 were in JCP's home base of the Carolinas, and 1 was in San Jose, California, where those in charge simply refused to go back on their word to Crockett. Survivor Series drew approximately 525,000 pay-per-view homes at a 7.0% buy rate. Starrcade drew roughly 20,000 homes. That is a 25-to-1 ratio. Jim Crockett had moved Starrcade from its traditional home in Greensboro, North Carolina, to Chicago's UIC Pavilion to signal national ambitions. His national pay-per-view debut was strangled in its crib. McMahon doubled down the following year, in 1988. He scheduled the free television Royal Rumble on the USA Network opposite JCP's Bunkhouse Stampede pay-per-view, which bombed. JCP retaliated by putting the first Clash of the Champions on TBS opposite WrestleMania 4, with Ric Flair versus Sting drawing a 5.8 cable rating. But the damage from Survivor Series was already done. By late 1988, JCP was near bankruptcy. Jim Crockett sold to Ted Turner's Turner Broadcasting System for a reported $9 million. The promotion was rebranded as World Championship Wrestling. The territorial war that had defined professional wrestling for the better part of a century was effectively over. Survivor Series was the killing blow. Number 7. The territorial system collapsed. Its dominance in 1987 did not just weaken the competition, it accelerated the total destruction of professional wrestling's territorial system, the century-old framework that had governed how wrestling operated in North America. Bill Watts's Universal Wrestling Federation, formerly Mid-South Wrestling, sold to Jim Crockett for $4 million on April 9, 1987, after the Oklahoma oil recession gutted its core market. Watts had reportedly considered suing McMahon for predatory business practices before deciding to sell instead. Championship Wrestling from Florida was absorbed by JCP that same year. World-class Championship Wrestling in Dallas withdrew from the NWA, but the Von Erich family tragedies were mounting. Mike Von Erich died in 1987, and Fritz Von Erich faked a heart attack at the December Christmas Star Wars show. That promotion would be sold to Jerry Jarrett in 1988. The AWA under Vern Gagne was in serious decline, losing talent every month. Nick Bockwinkel retired in May 1987, and Curt Hennig would soon leave for the WWE. The AWA would not formally fold until 1991, but by 1987 it was already a shell of what it had been. McMahon's talent raids were relentless. In 1987 alone, WWE signed Hacksaw Jim Duggan, the $1 Million Man, One Man Gang, and Butch Reed from the UWF and Mid-South. Harley Race came from the NWA. Rick Rude and Bam Bam Bigelow came from the independent circuit. Demolition was created from scratch. Combined with earlier raids that had brought Hogan from the AWA, Piper from Portland, Savage from Memphis, Steamboat from the NWA, and Bobby Heenan and Mean Gene Okerlund from the AWA, McMahon had assembled the most talented roster in wrestling by systematically draining every single competitor's talent pool. By the end of 1987, the only question was not if the territories would die, but how quickly. Number 8. The cultural impact was at its absolute peak. By 1987, the WWE was not just on television. It was embedded in every corner of American life. Hulk Hogan was a legitimate mainstream celebrity who transcended wrestling. He had been on the cover of Sports Illustrated, co-hosted Saturday Night Live, appeared on the A-Team, and starred alongside Sylvester Stallone in Rocky III. He was named the most requested celebrity of the 1980s by the Make-A-Wish Foundation. His catchphrase, "Train, say your prayers, and eat your vitamins," was a defining slogan of Reagan-era America. Hulk Hogan's Rockin' Wrestling cartoon ran in reruns on CBS through June 1987. This was not just a wrestler, this was a pop culture phenomenon. The merchandise empire was massive and constantly expanding. LJN's Wrestling Superstars figures, those iconic 8-inch bullet rubber action figures with the mini posters, were at peak popularity in 1987. Series 4 introduced 18 new figures, including Bret Hart, Jake Roberts, and Miss Elizabeth. LJN also produced stretch wrestlers, child-size championship belts, and the wrestling ring playset, which reportedly sold around 1.4 million units across the entire line's run. WWF ice cream bars launched in 1987 through Gold Bond Ice Cream. They were vanilla ice cream in a chocolate shell stamped with wrestler faces and bonus trading cards. George Steele even appeared on a Superstars segment showing how they were made at the factory. Topps released a 75-card 1987 trading set centered on Wrestlemania 3. Coliseum Home Video's VHS tapes were among Blockbuster Video's most rented titles, with the WrestleMania 1 and WrestleMania 2 tapes each selling over 1 million copies. These VHS releases retailed at nearly $55 each, which in 1987 was a significant purchase. The Pile Driver, the Wrestling Album 2, dropped on September 21st on Epic Records, featuring actual vocal performances from wrestlers and producing entrance themes that are still remembered today. The Companion's second annual Slammy Awards, cheekily billed as the 37th annual, taped on December 16th at Caesars Atlantic City and aired in syndication to a 6.2 rating. Vince McMahon himself performed Stand Back Live, one of the most iconic behind-the-scenes moments in wrestling history. Magazine went from bi-monthly to monthly publication in 1987 due to overwhelming demand. Randy Savage estimated in an interview that a third of his income came from merchandising. Think about what that means. The WWE had its logo on lunchboxes, bed sheets, vitamins, cereal, ice cream bars, workout kits, and sleeping bags. You could not escape it, and nobody wanted to. So why is 1987 one of the best years in WWE history? Because it is the year when every single element came together at once. WrestleMania 3 produced both the most iconic spectacle in wrestling history and the greatest in-ring performance the WWE had ever seen. And it did it on the same night, in the same building, in front of nearly 90,000 people. The Mega Powers Alliance gave wrestling its most popular act. The Honky Tonk Man delivered the most memorable heel Intercontinental Championship reign of all time. The Survivor Series simultaneously birthed a pay-per-view tradition that still runs almost 40 years later and delivered a fatal blow to the last viable national competitor. The Million Dollar Man debut introduced one of the all-time great wrestling characters. The television strategy put wrestling in front of more eyeballs than ever before. The merchandise empire made the WWE a permanent part of American consumer culture. And the territorial system that had governed professional wrestling for the better part of a century was effectively dead. Vince McMahon once said of his expansion philosophy, "Had my father known what I was going to do, he never would have sold his stock to me." In 1987, that gamble paid off in full. The WWE did not just dominate professional wrestling. It became something bigger than wrestling itself. It became a permanent piece of American culture that, nearly 4 decades later, we are still talking about. There are years where the WWE had hotter main event feuds. There are years where the in-ring work was technically superior. There are years where the business generated more raw revenue. But there is no year where absolutely everything, the spectacle, the storytelling, the roster depth, the cultural penetration, the business dominance, and the sheer ambition of one man's vision all peaked at the exact same time. That is what makes 1987 unique. That is what makes it unrepeatable. And that is why 1987 remains one of the greatest years in the history of the World Wrestling Federation. What is your favorite moment from 1987? Was it Savage versus Steamboat, the birth of the Mega Powers, the Survivor Series against Starrcade? I want to hear from you. Until next time.